sure you think your way through it a little bit.
Hi, I'm Jackie Reid and welcome to Lethal's Last Word. Week 2 of the finals is upon us. It's the semis and there are 2 games to look at. First, we're focusing on the Friday night clash between the Cats and Port Adelaide. Geelong is the favourite, but we discovered last weekend that you can't take anything for granted in September.
We didn't discover it last weekend, Jackie. Footy's always like that. Never expect, never assume. You never know what's going to happen until the game is played. That's my philosophy.
Well, head-to-head, the Cats have had the powers measure this year.
They have, and they've been so powerful. So we see they've won the couple of times they played. They got a mile in front in the Simmons Stadium game. That was when Monfils kicked 7 goals. So that's a bit of a one-off for Port, but Geelong still beat them easy. So, and they had a good win. So yeah, Geelong have had Port's measure this year.
Well, let's have a look at the ins and outs from last week's teams. Geelong has lost a couple to injury, but regained Tom Hawkins.
Well, Tom Hawkins back. I believe he's playing when he runs onto the field because we know he's had a bad back and it just seems to be a day-to-day situation. The out, Corey Enright is a gigantic out. Josh Hunt in. Josh Hunt's been a pretty good player, but I think he's lost a fair bit of his running ability. So Corey Enright being out of the side is maybe the loss of the logical matchup for Chad Wingard.
And that's right. So we'll take a look at some Chad Wingard highlights here. He's going to be off the leash if Corey Enright's not there.
Well, there's plenty of them. I mean, Cam Guthrie might take him, Taylor Hunt might take him, but the fact is he's just been such a creative player. Already, he's only in his 2nd year, and already he's one of those players you'd like him to be having a shot for goal after the siren from 30 or 40 metres out. He has kicked the clutch goals consistently. He goes into the midfield a little bit, but he more plays as a forward 6 player, gets up the field, gets a lot of the ball. It just is really creative. Wonderful young player.
How good could he be?
Oh, well, how good could he be? I mean, what he's done in his 1st and his 2nd year makes you think, well, with natural improvement, the prime years for a footballer are usually 22 to 28, so he could be anything when he gets into those years.
Well, let's move on to the key matchup, Jay Schultz versus Tom Lonergan. Why have you picked this particular matchup?
Form and injuries have an enormous effect. The injury to me of Corey Enright is a tremendous out for Geelong. Now, Lonergan, I don't reckon he's in great form. He's the logical matchup for Schultz. He's played on him the 2 times they've played this year, but normally Geelong play Lonergan on the opposition's best big target forward. But a couple of times in the last month, I reckon Lonergan's been getting done one-on-one a bit, and Harry Taylor has often had to play that role. So this is a critical matchup. If Lonergan can do the job on Schultz, it gives Geelong the option of maybe even pushing Harry Taylor up forward if they need to. So Lonergan hasn't been in great form, but his performance against Schultz is going to be critical.
To the key player for the Cats, it's Steve Johnson, and after Ryan Crowley did the job on him last week, you think Ken Hinkley would send someone to him
I would have thought so, and if ever he proved last week, first quarter, Geelong started the game brilliantly last week against Fremantle, and Johnson was fantastic. He had about 10 possessions, kicked a couple of goals. He's just so destructive ball in hands, but he's a forward-running midfielder. He gets the ball in the middle of the ground, but he charges into the forward line. So if ever there's a player that you have to tag out of the game, I reckon he's the key one. I reckon Cassisi will probably take the matchup. Kane Corns sometimes plays that role, but I think Dom Cassisi's back in the side the last few weeks, and he'll be a better matchup for Johnson.
OK, last word. Who's going to win this one?
I've got to stick. I've been underestimating Port all year, but I'll stick to the Cats to get through to the preliminary final.
Well, that's Lethal's last word on the semi-final between Geelong and Port Adelaide. The second semi-final Saturday night at ANZ Stadium. The Sydney Swans play host to Carlton. These 2 sides have only met the one time this year, and the Swans were too strong for the Blues on their home turf.
Yes, the SCG. I think they're a better team at the SCG than they are out at ANZ Stadium, which is where the bigger arena, which is where they are this Saturday night. Well, 23 points. They had Carlton's measure, but I'm not sure whether the Swans are in great touch as we're going into this last part of the year, or great energy levels, probably more so than touch. Outs, Ben McGlynn, Gary Rowan. They've decided to keep Lewis Jetta in, and Gary Rowan is out. They're 2 underdone players, but only can play 1, that's Jetta. But McGlynn's a big out. He's a good player.
No Adam Goods as well for the rest of the season.
Yes, well, there was always a question, would the Swans play Adam Goods? And he's obviously pulled up sore from his training this week, and I think they've announced he won't play for the duration of this season, no matter how far the Swans go. But he's such a good player. You might have played him if he'd just got 1 week's training and pulled up fit and well. But unfortunately for the Swans, hasn't happened.
The Blues have a few concerns as well. Matthew Cruiser under a bit of an injury cloud as well, and they've got a couple of emergencies, Brock McLean and Levi Casbolt, which we're not sure about as well.
Well, when you get to this stage of the year, really, when the teams run out on the field or you get the team sheets half an hour before the game, I think you really got to take a big note of the emergencies. Most coaches really reserve the right to make last-minute changes. So if Cruz is out, well, Casbolt is the obvious in. Brock McLean's interesting. I mean, you'd think he'd probably be in the side if he was fit and well, but he's an emergency. We'll see what that means, I guess, when we get closer to the game.
Well, let's take a look at your key player for the Blues. It's former skipper Chris Judd. He was terrific in the second half last weekend, but can he back it up this week?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we've seen Chris Judd just have moments in games, quarters in games, where he's just turned the tide. And then he was at the MCG last Sunday, which was one of the most wonderful days at the footy with the 95,000 people. Judd's third quarter just continually won the ball, and actually that was part of what got Carlton back into the game, and they picked up the 4-goal lead that Richmond had half-time. But first game back after a decent spell, the second game back, normally the residual soreness of the first game is a bit of a problem. So whether Judd can do it again this week, I think that's a big question.
Will the Swans send someone to him, do you think?
Well, I suspect they will. I mean, Ryan O'Keefe normally plays that kind of function of taking on the opposition's main inside getter, and Judd is really as much that for Carlton as anyone. But last week, and the other player I'd like to talk about is Hanbury, young Hanbury. Last week, he could possibly play on Judd, or he could play on Mark Murphy. It was a really bad matchup last week. They played him on Isaac Smith, who is the player that the opposition tried to tag. But we see in this fantastic vision, he is just a 400-metre runner, Isaac Smith. He charges around the field, and poor old Daniel Hanbury is just chasing. So I reckon he was extremely fatigued very early in the game. Smith didn't get a whole lot of the ball, but Hanbury was just a non-influence. So I think they've got to get some offence out of Hanbury as well, even if they play one-on-one on someone. I mean, that was just a bad turnover there, but sometimes when you are fatigued, you'll make errors. So he might play on Mark Murphy, or they might have to use him as a more offensive midfielder, because he's capable of being a top-notcher.
OK, we'll move on to the key indicator, and it's an interesting one. Many observers have noticed the Swans have been looking a little bit tired, and you've got a theory as to why.
Well, a lot of their players, you see 9 players there have played every game. Carlton have got 4, but their midfielders, O'Keefe, Parker, McVeigh, Melcheski, Kennedy, Jack. I mean, their running players have really had no rest. So everyone has one bye, and I just think they look like they've run out of legs. One of the indicators to me is always in energy levels is tackles. Grand final last year, that 110. That was a massive performance, the defensive pressure they applied to Hawthorn. But this year, just the last month, they just dropped down 65, 81, 65, 57. I mean, I would have thought to get sufficient defensive pressure on Carlton, they'll need to get 80 plus. And have they got the legs to keep getting there to lay the tackle? That's a gigantic question mark at the moment. They've been fading late in games, as they have done the last 2 weeks.
OK, it's time for your tip. Who's going to win this one and get into the prelim?
My principle is the loser of the qualifying final normally wins the semi-final. I'm going against that. And maybe I'm seduced by Carlton's second half last week, but more by the fact that the Swans look to me to be a team that is just struggling with their energy level. So I'm going to stick to the Blues, which I guess would be a bit of a turn-up according to most of the pundits.
Well, thanks once again, Leigh, and thank you for joining us again on Lethal's Last Word. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.